Hi, this is Ben Radford from Skeptical Inquirer magazine and Squaring the Strange podcast. I'm looking forward to coming out there in November for Skepticon in Sydney, and you're listening to the Skeptic Zone.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 822 for the 7th of July 2024. What a mouthful. Richard Saunders coming to you from the Skeptic Zone studios here in Sydney, Australia. And just as I shut the Skeptic Zone door, I noticed one of the cats, Maud the cat, had snuck into the studio. And, oh, you want to go out now? Maud? Now she's looking very guilty at the door. One moment. All right. You want to go out? You want to go out? Oh, those Skeptic Zone cats. Coming up on this week's show, a cool cat. A real cool cat. Ben Radford, all the way from Albuquerque, New Mexico, is going to be dropping by to tell us about his thoughts on the Roswell incident all those years ago in 1947, which ties in to a segment later in the show, the Trove segment. We'll also be looking at the Roswell UFO incident as reported here in Australia. Ben and I also talk about things like cryptozoology and his upcoming trip to Australia to speak at the Australian Skeptics National Convention, Skepticon, here in Sydney in November. Now we're going to have more information about that in the coming weeks and months, how you can buy tickets, who we have on the bill, etc. But for now, to whet your appetite in anticipation of meeting the man himself, we speak to Ben Radford. And apart from the Trove segment, which I mentioned earlier, we have the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, written by Tim Mendham, read, once again, of course, by Adrienne Hill. And this is Newsletter 200. Now, in the past week here in Sydney, we had Australian Skeptics, Sydney Skeptics in the pub. Always an interesting evening. And I was rebuked. I was rebuked. I had lots of buke, which I was rebuked with by listener Darryl Cahoon, who reminded me that I'd forgotten to mention the fact that we have Sydney Skeptics in the pub on the show. Well, with my addled, jet-lagged, travelled brain, sometimes these things happen. Last week, our talk by Stephen Vivaro was a sort of like the intersection of certain political ideas and skepticism. And it just goes to show that we have a wide range of topics at Skeptics in the Pub. And I must say we had a very nice crowd turn up for that talk. And speaking of not forgetting to mention things, I'm not going to forget to mention Global Skeptics in the Pub on Friday the 19th. Not far off. It kicks off at 7 p.m. on the 19th in New Zealand local time, and moves across the world as it becomes 7 p.m. in any particular time zone. So after New Zealand, it's Australia and so on. In fact, it says here, and I'll add a link in the show notes so you can find out more and join in, participating countries include Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, China, Estonia, England, France, and Hungary, India, Kenya, it's a song, isn't it? Malta, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Spain, USA, doesn't rhyme, but you get the idea. You get the idea. This is part of Skeptical, the Northern Californian Science and Skepticism Conference, which is also being held on July the 19th to the 21st. And you can find out more at skepticalcon.com or look at the link in this week's show notes. For more information, again, I will link in the show notes, but it says here, the first ever Global Skeptics in the Pub will begin at 7 p.m. local time in New Zealand on Friday, July 19, and go around the world to end at 9 p.m. local time in Hawaii, 24 hours later on the same calendar day. The event will take place on Zoom. There you go. If you have the Zoom app, or you can go to the Zoom site, you can join in with Global Skeptics in the Pub. And it says here you may join or leave any time during the 24 hours, which is interesting. So no matter where you are in the world, if you want to join in for the hour hosted by people in Austria or Australia, you can do that depending on how you calculate your time zones. Very exciting. I think the New South Wales Skeptics, or myself and some other people, plus our dear friends and colleagues in Victoria, those wonderful Victorian skeptics, will also be helping to take part during our hour or two at 7 p.m. on the 19th of July. A big shout out to my friends in lovely Victoria, in Melbourne, and I particularly think of the lovely Surf Coast, a wonderful part of the world with a lighthouse. For now, just head to skeptical-skeptics-in-the-pub. Or, again, just click the link in this week's show notes, and we hope we see you there. But now it's time for me to carefully open the door, make sure the Skeptic Zone cats don't run into the studio, then run down the stairs, and it's time for a muffin and a coffee. And while I do all that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Oh, there you go.
Ben Radford, what a delight it is to see you all the way there in beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. And as we're recording, I was lining this interview up and you're saying, well, I'd like to record, but there's these thunderous noises. And I'm going, what's going on? Is Albuquerque being invaded from Mars, or what's happening? But we happen to be recording on what is the 4th of July for you.
Yes, I think it's probably, I think it's the 5th of July for you, depending on where you are. But yeah, we have this thing, Independence Day. It's a thing they do every year, and for reasons that escape me, the main theme seems to be loud fireworks and barbecues.
Okay.
Yeah, which is fine. Well, I'll be honest, it gets a bit annoying, just because it's just there's a lot going on there, and it's just like I have a cat who is here beside me.
I see.
And I think he blames me for the loud noises. I don't have dogs. I feel badly for people who do have dogs.
Yeah.
But I try not to be too much of a curmudgeon about it, because I think any chance that people can get together and be friendly and celebrate. But
you know what? As we're talking, Ben, and you didn't see. Yes, you saw it. The cat just walked right behind you.
He did. He knows his cue. He doesn't know his own name, but he knows when he's being talked about.
Maybe all is forgiven. But Ben, doesn't being a curmudgeon, isn't it part of the skeptical territory? Isn't that the cross we have to bear?
It is, I try, and you of course deal with this a lot yourself, Richard, where I try to parse it out, right? I mean, like me for going on decades now, we get the question like, what is a skeptic exactly? And you have to explain, like, it's not a cynic, it's not a doubter, it's this sort of, and I don't know, you and I have talked about before about whether the word skeptic is even a useful phrase or not, and I have mixed feelings about it.
It's an old question, and this is a question that's been tossed around for decades now, because we have lots of people calling themselves skeptics who have no idea what the word means.
Right.
In fact, just the other night I met a couple of people who at Skeptics in the Pub. And it turns out they were in the wrong room. But I said, you're welcome to stay, And they said, oh, what is this? And I said, well, it's Skeptics in the Pub. And he said, well, what do you think about the 9/11 Okay, little red flags coming up. Are you skeptical of the mainstream media? Okay. Well, I hope you have a good evening.
Well, what I do when I get the 9/11 question, I begin by saying it was absolutely a conspiracy. I said, look, I'm a noted skeptic. 9/11 was clearly a conspiracy. And their eyes will light up, and I'll say, well, of course, it was bin Laden and the other conspirators who, and then they say, well, I said, well, who did you think it was? And they say, well, and they give some shadowy thing, and George W. Bush, and I say, look, I'm by no stretch of imagination a George W. Bush fan, but I don't think he had any role in this whatsoever. And so, anyway,
there's a good site called 911facts.dk. It's a great resource for a proper skeptical investigation of all the conspiracy claims around 9/11. But Ben, this is just your interesting background and your wealth of knowledge is just a taste of what people can expect when they meet you in person. Yes,
meet me in person?
Meet you in Australia this November at the Australian Skeptics National Convention right here in Sydney. And we're busy behind the scenes looking at panels and whatnot and how we can use you as much as we possibly can. I think at the moment, you're going to be greeting people at the door, then you're going to be parking their cars, and I think serving them breakfast. We're going to get everything we can out of you.
That was my understanding, yes. I'm very excited about it. The parking the cars thing, now you all drive on which side of the road?
It doesn't matter, Ben. Just make it up as you go along.
No, as long as I'm not being fed those musk sticks, which you tried to poison me with years back, or the Vegemite, I think we'll be fine.
Vegemite, you got to say that right, or you'll be out of the country on the very next plane. Now, Ben, coming up later on in this episode of the Skeptic Zone, I read out some newspaper reports from 1947, and I know that year means a lot to you.
It does indeed.
And what was interesting, of course, we're talking about the Roswell incident of 1947, but what was interesting to me is what I'm reading out later on in the show are from Australian newspapers. Now, I found it interesting when I was researching this that the news, a couple of days after the event, made the newspapers here in Australia. And I must admit, I was a little taken aback. I thought, why? Why? I guess it was part of the 1940s, early 1950s UFO hype.
Yeah, I think there was. I mean, there tends to be these sort of epicenters of UFO flaps. Obviously, there's Washington, D.C., there was Roswell and things like that. But of course, even back then, you had, AP stories, you had wire stories, and they would go everywhere. And so it's, I am surprised it got there that quickly, however. But if the news is that a flying saucer was recovered, hey, Aussie should know about this as well.
Absolutely, but it is interesting, and I think because I recorded that segment a few days ago as we're chatting. It's interesting that yes, there was a little flurry of reports, and then radio silence for years on this. And just to remind me, Ben, what was it that suddenly resurrected the Roswell incident?
Well, the Roswell case is fascinating for many reasons. One of which is that the whole story is very heavily infused with folklore and legend. And I don't know if you can hear the bombs bursting in air outside me at the moment, but that's right. What that is.
Or it's the aliens coming back.
But yeah, could be the aliens coming down to prove themselves. I don't know. But no, the Roswell case in particular is fascinating for, well, again, many reasons, but one of them is that it was essentially a non-story pretty quickly after it broke. You had this debris which is found in this field outside of Roswell in my home state, of course, where you've been. And there was a flurry of newspaper reports, and at one point the Army said that it was in fact a saucer, and they said no, it's a crashed weather balloon. But of course, we know in retrospect that it was Project Mogul, a high altitude surveillance balloon system, which at the time was classified. So there were legitimate reasons for not telling the world what it actually was. But nothing happened for decades. And this is the part that the UFO believers have a hard time overcoming, is that for basically going on 30, 40 years, there was no Roswell story. It wasn't until the 1970s and 80s that people, including Charles Berlitz, resurrected the whole story and sensationalized it. But for literally decades, no one talked about it. It was a non-thing.
Because it's hard, it's hard for me to remember what I knew when I was a kid in the 1970s, because information was limited. It's not like the internet these days. But in those early days, I don't remember hearing about Roswell until sometime later. I, like lots of people, had heard of UFOs, but it wasn't until Close Encounters of the Third Kind that the world went really bonkers in the 1970s.
Right. Yeah, it was the same thing here, where when I was growing up, and I think you and I are about the same age, I didn't really think much of UFOs until Close Encounters, and then ET and things like that, and of course so much of how the public perceives and thinks about UFOs is influenced by pop culture. And you see the same thing, for example, with exorcisms and the Amityville Horror and The Exorcist and all these pop culture films and books that really percolated through the culture, and we see that manifesting itself in ways that people, they talk about alien abductions, they talk about the Greys. A lot of these can be directly traced to pop culture depictions, not necessarily to first-person experiences.
I think Joe Nickell made this point some years ago too. I seem to remember he had a poster or a chart showing the development.
Yes. The alien timeline.
And you can tell, according to what movie was in fad at the time. Yeah. That's what people think aliens look like. So
yeah, it was very clever. I liked Joe's approach on that. Looking at UFO iconography. I did a similar thing years back with the chupacabra, where I actually went and got some of the original toys that came out soon after the chupacabra emerged in 95, 96. And it's fascinating to see how that particular beast has changed its form over the years. So
I didn't know that. I thought it was based on the creature from the movie Species, and I didn't know it's got. Well, I guess it would have to, upon being told and told again, and various people coming up with their depictions or what they think it might look like.
Yeah, I mean, when you go back and you look at it, I mean, the original chupacabra, as you mentioned, was influenced by the movie Species, and I interviewed the original eyewitness. So for the first few years, it was this sort of spiky-backed alien-type creature. Again, it looks a lot like the monster Syl, designed by H.R. Giger in the movie Species. But then all that changed in 2000 when a rancher in Nicaragua, outside of Managua, shot what he thought was some quadruped, some four-legged animal that was attacking his animals. And that was the first time that anybody pointed to a dead carcass, in this case in a rural ranch in Nicaragua, and said, this must be the chupacabra. And from that point on, the chupacabra had four legs.
And now people will swear that it's has been around for, I don't know, centuries.
And it's fascinating because every now and then when I give talks or someone interviews me about the chupacabra, oftentimes someone will sometimes politely, sometimes not, as you know, these things go, say, well, that's all well and good, but you're flat out wrong. I'm like, okay, well, my usual answer is, that's interesting. I might be wrong. Why do you say I'm wrong? And sometimes the answer is, well, I saw a half-hour TV show that contradicts you. I'm like, well, here's the thing about that. I probably know more about this, given that I spent five years researching it, than whatever half-hour, half-assed TV show you saw on cable last night. But nevertheless, I'm open to new information, and I've always told people, say, look, if I'm wrong in one of my investigations, one of my articles, or one of my books, tell me. I'm sincerely and genuinely curious. I want to know, how did I get that wrong? Where was I misled? And if the information is better than mine, I will happily update it and credit them.
Well, let's swing the conversation back quickly again to UFOs. I can't seem to get them out of my head, Ben, because we have the situation where we are living through what I think is the tail end now of the latest UFO hype flap, involving the congressional hearings, involving Grush,
Yes.
and particularly for Australians involving Ross Coulthart, the Australian journalist who's been really at the forefront of perpetuating all this and promising, as we've heard so many times over the centuries, decades, millennia, any day now. Any day now.
I have to tell you just real quick. I remember when I was still at the Center for Inquiry office in Amherst outside of Buffalo. I still worked there, but I was living in Buffalo at the time, and they have a wonderful library there, which I'm sure you've seen. It's the Tim Mendham is the librarian there. And at one point, I was perusing the stacks downstairs, and I came across an early issue of Fate magazine, which of course Fate is notoriously, mystery mongering. And I just happened to flip through it. I was looking, curious to sort of see, mystery mongering from a half century earlier, or even later. And it was fascinating. I happened to turn to a page, and there it was. They were saying that it was that any day now, the UFO mystery was going to be solved because the government was finally going to blow the lid off, and they were finally going to go ahead. And it was like any moment, like it was like, they seemed reluctant to even put this in print because they were so worried that within the next few weeks, the U.S. government was finally going to admit everything. And I look at and it was, I think, 52 or something. I'm like, how's that going, guys?
Yes, how's that going for you? But I wonder if you might be a little bit like-minded with me. I really think with the Ross Coulthart and the David Grush, I think we really are on the tail end of that particular fad, because it's hard to know. They're going to have to keep outdoing themselves, because they've had this big hype. Right. We know where it is. It's a giant thing, and the Italians are hiding it, or, here it is in front of Congress, and, crickets. Nothing's happened. Nothing is going to happen. We know that. It's not going to.
Right. Right.
Do you think then that we can sit back, or maybe just around the corner somebody else will be making waves?
Well, as you know, there's a lot of these topics, and UFOs are sort of the classic example of flaps, right? Where, it's the same thing with the Bermuda Triangle and Bigfoot and take your pick, right? As you and I have talked about before, it's the unsinkable rubber duck syndrome, right?
Yes, absolutely.
As soon as you think that that's been put to bed, and then no one in their right mind believes that, you get a phone call from someone asking about the Bermuda Triangle again, and you go, but you're right. You make a very interesting point. At some point, they have to put up or shut up, and for us skeptics have been saying that for decades. But I think even among believers, right, at some point, even the staunchest believers, like, hold on, right? You've been promising disclosure every year, since I was 20. I'm in my 60s now. Where the hell is it? So it's and it's the same thing with Bigfoot, right? Which is one of the reasons why you have these occasional Bigfoot hoaxes, right? Because the Bigfoot believers, they got nothing. They still don't have a body. They still don't have any good evidence, right? So in order to sort of keep up the interest, they have to put out these fake sightings and the ambiguous this and that and the other. And so I think at some point, I don't want to say that people wise up. I wish that were true.
Surely they lose interest. A certain percentage of the population must lose interest.
But at some point, they even the average person who's not a self-professed skeptic at some point says, "Come on,
come on,"
right? conspiracy theories, and I've seen that. Mick West in his book Escaping the Rabbit Hole, he's talked about that, and at some point, and you've seen this, right? You talk to a conspiracy believer, and one of the tactics for dealing with them is to sort of give wedge issues, right? So you believe this, but you also believe that, and after you ask a couple questions, you usually get to somebody who's like, well, I don't believe that. You say, okay, well, yeah, well. Why is it that you believe the other things? And and they have to sort of like, oh, okay, yeah. Well, and so, there's a couple of wins here and there, but I think for the most part, people at some point they just get, they get fatigued because it's the same stuff over and over and nothing ever comes of it.
Yeah. Well, as I say, people there's only so long you can hold people's attention, especially if you're giving them the old bait and switch.
Yeah, which they've been doing for years.
But on the flip side, of course, what you do get are new generations coming up who haven't been flim-flam since they were 20, because they're only 20 now.
Right.
But they will be.
Right. Just give it time. You can set your watch by it. And I think that's actually one of the things that us skeptics can really make hay of is point out to people, give people the context. Say, look, I know you're excited about this, but just so you know, I've been doing this a long time. I've heard this over and over and over again. Yeah. So whether it's UFO disclosure or the new Bigfoot DNA found or whatever else, oftentimes you say, "Hey, this is interesting. This is all well and good. This ain't the first rodeo," and none of the other ones came up. So.
I know you're excited about this. Well, so were your grandparents.
Exactly. Great grandpa thought it was going to happen any day now. So there you go. Make of that what you will.
You will, folks. What a great time you're going to have when you meet Ben Radford in person. You can rub shoulders with Ben and then bamboozle him with your knowledge of local, maybe cryptids here in Australia. And we have cryptids we can't leave the house without jumping over or falling over cryptids, Ben.
I know. I'm so excited to, again, I've never been to Australia. I've always wanted to come, and I'm so grateful to you and the Australian Skeptics for having me out there. And I'm really just looking forward to it. So I'm giddy with excitement, and it's not even coming up yet.
That's great. Well, look, I'll meet you at the airport with a couple of bicycles. We'll get you to your hut by the river, and we'll start your Australian adventure. And folks, coming up soon, we'll be giving you lots of details about how you can book your tickets for Skepticon 2024 right here in Sydney, Australia. Ben Radford, enjoying the 4th of July fireworks over there in beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you.
Thanks so much. Always great to talk to you. Hi, I'm Ben Radford, co-host of Square and Strange podcast. In these trying times, as we help each other out to hold on to hope, we want you to know that we're here for you.
Hey, what are you going on about?
Who's interrupting my heartfelt promotional copy?
It's me, Celestia Ward, your co-host. Really? In these trying times? That's the best you can do?
Well, I'm just doing what everyone else is doing. I thought...
That's not what we do.
Oh, for crying out loud, who else is here?
Pascual Romero, your other co-host?
Hey.
We don't do what everybody else does, Ben. That's kind of our thing at Squaring the Strange.
Yeah, we try to approach things a little differently than your standard skeptical talky talk show.
We do our own thing, bringing science, critical thinking, and skepticism to bear on issues of the day. We've got a professional skeptical author, Ben, who has decades of experience researching topics for 12 books and thousands of articles.
And a cartoonist skeptic, Celestia, who knows her stuff when it comes to facial weirdness and the psychology of perception.
And a badass heavy metal rock star and tech engineer, Pascual, who brings knowledge of all things audio, plus a bunch of neck tattoos.
Squaring the Strange explores topics both mysterious and mundane through a critical lens. Monsters, panics, media literacy.
Okay, forget the whole trying times promo idea. But we have chupacabras and clown panics, right?
Yes,
Ben.
Hello, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, and I'm here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 200, and remember, you can subscribe to this newsletter and receive it every other week in your inbox. The full newsletter includes more stories and links to all the stories mentioned. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has first this time. Welcome back, Tim. Hi all, says Tim. We're back and wearing our best party hat for the global celebrations over issue number 200. But our time away means catching up on a lot of things that have lain dormant, waiting for our return. So, this is a bumper edition of the newsletter, and we won't hold you up any further. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Skepticon 2024, Sydney, from November 23rd through 24th. Tickets will be available soon for the convention in Sydney, with a speaker list growing by the day. Ben Radford, paranormal investigator and deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer. Dr. Carl Kruszelnicki, science communicator par excellence. Alanta Colley, science communicator, comedian, and convention MC. Richard Saunders, I wonder who that guy is. Podcaster and Skeptics chief investigator. Josh Sepps, satirist and media presenter. And young skeptics who are high school students and their science projects. A representative of the New South Wales Teacher Association on Teaching Science. Annie McCubbin, actor, author, and corporate communication consultant on critical thinking. Amelia Wilmer, award-winning journalist and founder of the Armadale Skeptics in the Pub. Paul Cropper, paranormal and cryptozoology researcher. Bill Chalker, UAP or UFO investigator, and more to come. Skepticon 2024 will run from November 23rd through 24th at the Guthrie Theatre, University of Technology, Sydney, with an opening function at the Occidental Hotel in York Street, Wynyard, on the evening of November 22nd, on Friday preceding the convention. Tickets for the convention and the program of speakers will be available later this month, so keep an eye out for it. The Surprising Psychology of Paranormal Phenomena. This is an Economist podcast on science and technology, from alien abductions to conspiracy theories. Quote, we ask the psychologist Chris French why so many people believe in paranormal experiences and what it tells us about the human mind, end quote. But you'll have to pay to listen to it. Sci researchers are closer to skeptics than to lay believers. A University of Virginia study suggests that, despite their high belief in psi phenomena, psi researchers demonstrate a commitment to sound reasoning about evidence that is no different from that of skeptics. Virginia City repeals a ban on fortune-telling. The prohibition that banned palmistry, palm reading, phrenology, and clairvoyance was put in place in 1979 in response to concerns about, quote, rising interest in the occult, end quote, and the satanic cult fervor of the time. It was repealed because, quote, it was no longer needed, end quote. But was it ever? Meanwhile, the Taiwanese government will not recognize pet psychic as a valid profession, good for them, as it is not backed by any scientific evidence. Why 100 ghost hunts left me skeptical. The founder of pop paranormal website Higgy Pop says he's a skeptic, and the many ghost hunts he's been on haven't changed his opinion. Then again, the site does feature a paranormal investigation survey for amateur and professional ghost hunters. And I actually took that survey, and it did not have a skeptical bent at all. It assumed you're a believer. sciencey music at the Brisbane Planetarium 2024. On August 17th, Nate Eggins, aka Conspiracy of One and winner of the 2023 Skeptics Thornet Award for the Promotion of Reason, is back with his planetarium concert, bringing his signature blend of science, music, and humor to audiences. It will be held under the Cosmic Sky Dome at the Sir Thomas Brisbane Planetarium and runs as part of National Science Week 2024. He will be joined by sciencey guests Tamara Davis and Benjamin Pope, both professors in astrophysics from the University of Queensland. Global Skeptics in the Pub and Skeptical Convention. The North California Skeptics Skeptical Online Conference will be held on Saturday to Sunday, July 20th to 21st, 2024. It will be preceded by the first ever Global Skeptics in the Pub on Friday, July 19th, beginning with New Zealand at 7 p.m. local time, and then Australia, and working its way around the world. Or across the world, if you're a flat earther. And if you're in Calgary, we're hosting one here as well, at Bottle Screw Bill's Pub. Check out the meetup page for the Rocky Mountain Atheists. The June 2024 issue of The Skeptic is out in digital and hard copy format. I just got mine. It features a look at pre-Darwin evolutionaries, those who predated the famous exposition of the theory with pronouncements of their own. We also look at the checkered history of Alfred Russel Wallace, the fellow traveler on the road to natural selection, but whose heritage was tarnished with strange ideas. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both. The digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. New subscriptions start with the next issue, but you can also order a copy of the most recent one as a treat. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Items of interest. Tasmania Tourism recruiting paranormal investigators. Tasmania Tourism has made a call to Australians with a unique proposition to fill a quirky list of odd jobs, and they'll even pay for you to get there. The lighthearted hiring blitz is a part of a campaign to entice winter visitors, with vacancies open for jobs including a wombat walker. Ooh, I'd like to do that. Sauna stoker, oyster organizer, wine whisperer, that's interesting, and paranormal investigator. The last is for Willow Court, Australia's oldest continually run asylum. The jobs themselves will be unpaid, but the chosen candidates will have their accommodation and flights paid down to the Apple Isle. Angels or aliens? Vatican holds UFO secrets. While the staff at the Vatican Archives acknowledge that their vast shelves contain amounts of miracles, they deny that any of their holdings pertain to aliens and a crashed UFO recovered by fascist dictator Benito Mussolini and given to the Americans. But that hasn't stopped UFO conspiracy proponents from claiming otherwise. Uri Geller returns library book 47 years late. The Spoonbender is scraping the bottom of the barrel for reasons to be in the public eye. And the book, by the way, was about, guess who? It was about him. Harvard scientists suggest possibility of hidden alien civilizations. Quote, a recent paper from a team of unnamed researchers at Harvard and Montana Technological University has proposed an idea that is likely to spark debate within the scientific community, end quote. No kidding. Quote, the researchers speculate that sightings of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, could indicate the presence of intelligent beings concealed on Earth. These beings might be underground, on the moon, which technically is not on Earth, or even walking among us disguised as humans, end quote. silliest story of the week. Psychic medium claims her nights out are ruined by spirits forcing her to down her drinks. Oh. A psychic says the spirits of the dead, as opposed to the spirits of the bar, are making her down her drinks and leave for another bar so she can go and see the spirits' loved ones to pass along messages as, quote, a kind of supernatural postie, end quote. Well, that was fun. To celebrate the 200th newsletter, I thought I would give some interesting facts about the number while I contemplate running upstairs and eating some heavenly fries, or chips, depending upon the country you are from, with gravy. Yes, that seems to be a Canadian cultural thing, as well as that of Northern England and probably other places worldwide. I am not talking about the well-known Quebec favorite, poutine, which adds cheese curds into the mix, which I didn't know about until I was an adult. However, gravy and fries were a favorite of mine when I was growing up. Now, back to the number 200. This is the money you receive when you pass go in Monopoly. The Billboard 200 ranks the 200 most popular music albums in the US. Richard Petty, an American NASCAR race car driver, won 200 times and remains the leading all-time winner. Approximately 200 BC, Eratosthenes calculated the first accurate measurement of the distance between Earth and the Sun by studying lunar eclipses. His result is roughly 150 million kilometers. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill. Oh, and just for your information, my sign-off is precisely 200 words, including this bit. Oh, one more thing. Make sure to check out the videos from the New Mexico Skeptic Camp on YouTube. Originally, I had set out to film the fascinating festivities of the Skeptic Camp, but found myself fumbling with the unfamiliar camera and distracted by the delightful, dazzling discussions. Once home, I encountered dastardly delays due to encountering endless editing escapades as I attempted to educate myself in this endeavor. Yeah, I'd never done this before. I believe the results are a somewhat shaky, yet satisfyingly singular Skepticamp chronicle, alliteration dedicated to Ben Radford, who apparently loves alliteration. Oh, one more thing. The YouTube channel is VNMSR, that's THENMSR, which stands for the New Mexicans for Science and Reason. Link is in the show notes. Finally, signing off from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, this is Adrienne Hill.
ただいま聞いていただいているポッドキャストはオーストラリアから The Skeptic Zone という科学と論理のポッドキャストです。英語は世界中で数ある言葉の一つですが、このポッドキャストはいろいろな国の言葉で紹介します。www.skepticzone.tv を調べて、ホームページの下までにスクロールすると、折り紙のピガサスという翼のある豚を工夫したリチャード・ソーンダスのオリジナルの折り紙のポスターをダウンロードをすることができます。
Here we go, once again back to the archives at Trove, at trove.nla, which means the National Library of Australia.gov.au, the online resource full of digitised newspapers from Australia, and sometimes a little further afield, and what a rich source of information it is, not only for skeptical investigators, but for the general public, for anybody doing research on anything, because the wealth of information contained in those pages is quite staggering. And today we're going to look at a subject that we've probably looked at before here and there in relation to aliens and UFOs. This is the famous Roswell case. Roswell in New Mexico. I've nearly been there. I've nearly been there. I was in Albuquerque some years ago. Didn't quite get to Roswell. It's not really close to anything. One day. Now, this is a very significant place in the realm of the UFO story, or flying saucers, I think, as they were called in the day, in 1947. So we're talking about events of in the order of 77 years ago. And if we have a quick look over at the Skeptics Dictionary, Roswell, on or around Independence Day, 1947, during a severe thunderstorm near Roswell, New Mexico, an Air Force experiment using high-altitude balloons blew apart and fell to the Earth. This minor event in the history of reconnaissance turned out to be the Big Bang of ufology. UFO enthusiasts have come to see that the 4th of July as the day an alien spaceship crashed on Earth. Some UFOologists claim that aliens were taken away by the US Air Force and other government conspirators for an interrogation or an autopsy. Some claim that all our modern technology was learnt by analyzing and copying the technology of the aliens, which is a little bit insulting to the hardworking people who actually developed a lot of our modern technology. The actual crash site was on the Foster Ranch, 75 miles north of Roswell, a small town doing a big business feeding the insatiable appetite of UFO enthusiasts. Roswell has a UFO museum, the International Museum and Research Center, and hosts an annual alien festival. Shops cater to this curious tourist trade, much as Inverness caters to the Loch Ness crowd. It seems a bit unfair to Corona, New Mexico, which is actually the closest town to the alleged crash site. Roswell is the nearest military base, however, and that is where the remains of the alien craft and its occupants were allegedly taken. Why the aliens were not taken to a superior medical facility remains a mystery. And the article goes on, and towards the end, it says, to skeptics, Roswell is a classic example of what D.H. Rawcliffe called retrospective falsification. An extraordinary story is told, then retold with embellishments and remodeled with favorable points emphasized, while unfavorable ones are dropped. False witnesses put in their 2 cents, such as mortician Glen Innes. In the case of Roswell, we also have a few unreliable characters who add their delusions. And it goes on. I think you get the idea. And that page is certainly worth a read, and I will link to that in this week's show notes. But now let's turn to the pages of Australian newspapers to see what was being reported at the time. And we start with a report in the Glen Innes Examiner, dated Wednesday, the 9th of July, 1947. So a few days after the main events. Quote, flying saucer, end quote, found in New Mexico, New York, Wednesday. A flying saucer reported found on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico, turned out to be a weather balloon. The United States Army, Air Force, announced the finding of the saucer amid a welter of controversy surrounding reports from at least 40 different states over the past week that flying discs or flying saucers have been sighted in the skies above the United States. Official secrecy was at first maintained about the disc, now in the possession of the Army, but Lieutenant, or Lieutenant, depending on where you are in the world, but Lieutenant Warren Hout, I think that says, Public Information Officer at Roswell Army Airfield, announced that the find had been made sometime last week. The disc was turned over at the airfield through the cooperation of the sheriff of the district, and following an inspection at Roswell Airfield, has been loaned by the intelligence officer at Roswell Airfield to headquarters. In Washington later, Brigadier General Roger Ramey said that the, quote, battered object which previously had been described as a flying disc near Roswell was being sent by air to the Army Air Force Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio, end quote. General Ramey, who is now the commander of the 8th Air Force at Fort Worth, Texas, received the object from Roswell and, in telephoning Army Air Force headquarters in Washington, described it as of flimsy construction, almost like a box kite. He did not indicate the object's size, but said it was, quote, apparently some sort of tin foil, end quote. Then came an announcement from Fort Worth that a weather officer had identified the object found on the ranch as a weather balloon. Now, not to be outdone by an international story, the next paragraph tries to bring the whole UFO question to a more local perspective. Sydney had watchers. Sydney, Wednesday. Many people spent the night watching the sky for flying saucers. The only, quote, successful, end quote, person was a former university scientist, Raymond Roper of Mossman, who at 1:50 a.m. today said he saw a flying object. It wasn't a flying saucer. It was a flying teardrop, he said. Roper said it was a shining object like a teardrop and moving quickly across the sky, colored lemon and yellow and framed by white clouds. The teardrop vanished over the horizon in a flash. A little bit of local excitement there. So what did the Newcastle Sun, dated the 9th of July 1947, have to say? Saucer reported found by U.S. Air Force on ranch in New Mexico. Our special representative and Australian Associated Press. Washington, Tuesday. The U.S. Army Air Force announced today that a flying saucer or disc had been found on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. And this report is very similar to the previous report, I think. The object, which is not described, is now in the possession of the U.S. Army. Brigadier General Roger Ramey said the battered object was being sent to the Army Air Force Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. And the rest of the paragraph is from the previous story, but then we have this paragraph. Site of experiments. New Mexico is a state where the Army Air Force has for years been carrying out experiments with guided missiles. It has extensive desert areas suitable for such experiments, as firing the German V-2 100 miles into the air at 3,600 miles an hour. And then following is from the previous story once again. And then it says a guided missile scientist at the U.S. rocket testing ground at White Sands, New Mexico, reported today that he had seen a flying saucer. Dr. C.J. John said that he and two fellow scientists noticed a glare in the sky and saw a silvery disc whirring along. We watched it for nearly 60 seconds. Then it disappeared, he said. He said he reported it to the Army officers who just smiled. When President Truman's press secretary was asked about the flying saucers, he said that no official investigation was being authorized by the White House. Some U.S. newspapers have featured the experiments of Professor Cotton of Sydney in causing students to see bright saucer-shaped spots through concentrating their gaze on one place in the sky for 10 minutes. Another local angle. Latest freak reports include 2 men near Johannesburg, South Africa, reported seeing objects the size of gramophone records flying in a V formation. Very little UFOs. In England, a clergyman's wife said that the other evening she saw something, quote, which was more like a ring than a saucer, flying inland from the sea, end quote. A shield-shaped luminous object flying at tremendous speed was reported seen over North Zealand, Denmark, by several people who said it disappeared behind a hill and probably fell into the sea. First report of flying saucers came from pilot Kenneth Arnold, who, while flying over the state of Washington on June 24, said he saw them flashing through the skies at an estimated 1,200 miles per hour. And what do we have here from the Advocate from Burnie, Tasmania, the 10th of July 1947? Flying disc was weather balloon. Roswell, New Mexico, Wednesday, Australian Associated Press. What was reported to be a flying disc found on a ranch near Roswell proved to be a weather balloon. Flying discs or flying saucers are objects reported to have been seen currently in the skies from various points throughout the United States. Brigadier General Ramey of the Army Air Forces, broadcasting to deflate stories to which the discovery of the weather balloon had given rise, confirmed that it was a weather observation device. He added,
"As for flying discs, I have never seen one."
In a statement announcing the discovery, Colonel William Blanchard, commander of the Roswell Army Air Base, had specifically referred to the object as a flying disc. Army weather experts in Washington said the weather balloons of the type found at Roswell could hardly be a basis for the scores of reports of flying saucers throughout the country. Only a few of them were used daily. And in the Sun from Sydney on the 10th of July 1947, Colonel rebuked on saucer story. Sun special. New York, Wednesday. U.S. Air Force Headquarters has soundly rebuked Colonel William Blanchard, base commander at Roswell, New Mexico, for issuing a report that a flying saucer had landed there. Blanchard is reported to have gone on leave. The Air Force explained that the object was a weather balloon. The American press is still carrying reports of flying discs from all over the world. The visual epidemic of saucers appears to be declining in Sydney. Okay, once again, trying to bring it to a local perspective. In contrast to hundreds of calls yesterday, only 4 people rang The Sun last night to say they had seen a flying saucer. From Grafton, Mr. W. Quinlan said that while fishing in the Clarence River, he saw shiny disc-like objects in the sky. They were not moving at a fast rate and appeared to be eddying with the breeze. Now, I have discovered many other reports around the same time, but they seem to be, as we've just discovered, repeats or rewriting of the same initial reports. So there's not terribly much to add of reports written in those days around the time. But it is interesting to see that this report made it all the way to Australia, and I guess around the world. It was an interesting story of the time. And it's also interesting to note that after the initial reports died down, there was scarcely a mention until many decades later when the story gained more traction, more hype. 77 years ago. Hard to believe. So we're left to wonder whether 77 years ago some reckless alien pilots had a misadventure, or maybe it was a more mundane explanation. Well, as I've said before, UFOs are the gift that just keeps on giving, and We await with bated breath for the next UFO hype, flap, kerfuffle. It'll come. Sure, why not? It's one thing that history has shown us, that the UFO fads and phases and so on come and go. Come and go. There will be another one. But will there be an alien at the end of it? Maybe, maybe not. But you too can look at aliens, or UFOs, or weather balloons, or lots of things when you go to Trove at trove.nla.gov.au. Because when you do that, you never know. You never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and thank you to my wonderful Patreons and PayPal supporters. And a new supporter in the last week. You know who you are. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to catch up soon. Coming up on next week's show, the Trove segment looks at a very interesting and important part of skeptical history. This is the time James Randi exposed the Reverend Peter Popoff, and we're talking about circa 1986, and this is a report written up in the Australian newspapers a couple of years after the event. A classic of skeptical investigation performed by none other than James Randi. Also, I hope to bring you more details about Skeptics in the Pub, the global Skeptics in the Pub. Mark your calendars no matter where you are around the world. Mark your calendars for 7 p.m. on the 19th of July. And while you're about it, have a look at the details for the Skepticalcon coming up on the same date. Now, as Ben Radford and I were discussing, Skepticon, not to be confused with Skepticalcon, Skepticon 2024 will be on November the 23rd and the 24th here in Sydney at the University of Technology in Sydney, which is downtown, convenient for everything. This will be the 40th Australian Skeptics National Annual Convention. Hard to believe. And over the coming weeks, we will be bringing you more details about other speakers, and soon we'll be releasing details about how you can get your ticket. I suspect there'll be things like good deals, early bird tickets, prices, and things like that. We'll all find out together before too long. And apart from Ben Radford, another confirmed speaker is none other than Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, and the MC for the event is the wonderful Melbourne comedian Alanta Colley. Having said all that for this week, with the Skeptic Zone cats outside the door waiting to come in and sit by the heater, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Well, we're at Skeptics in the Pub, and yes, it's the people who listen after the music for the dice game. I'm with... Hello, you're a listener to the show, I understand.
Andrew,
nice to see you here. And
Stephanie.
Hello, Stephanie.
Zach.
Hi, Zach. So we have a mysterious die here which disappeared briefly. We've got it back again. We'll use that one. I'm going to roll this. It's a D10. I'm going to roll this 3 times, and between the 4 of us, surely we'll come up with a... definitely go to Zach. We'll come up with the right one. So, I, for one, am going to predict ahead of time
even before I roll it. I'm going to predict a 5, a 2, a 6, and for a supplementary, I'll predict an 8. So I can't change those now. So what would you like to predict for the first one?
I'm going to go 6.
6?
Go 2.
2?
7.
7. Here we go. It fell off the table. 3. Oh, none of us got a 3. Damn. Better luck next time. What do you think?
1.
1.
I got 2 again.
2.
7.
7. And I've already predicted a 2, so here we go. 7. Oh, we have a winner chicken dinner. Okay. So what was the first number? I've even forgotten what it was. 3, okay. 3 and a 7. All right. Next one.
5.
A 5, yep.
4.
4.
8.
8. And I've already predicted a 6. Here we go. 6. Yes. It's not rigged. I promise you.
It's about to get satanic though.
Well, I'll swap them now. I'll use the second one. I'm predicting an 8 already. What do you think?
5.
5?
7.
7.
5.
Number
5. Number 3. Oh, here's our dinner. It's number 3.
7. Sorry.
Our waiter was predicting number 3. Here we go. Number 8 is my prediction.
Determined to hit the other dimension.
10. That when it's a 0, it's a 10. So today's winning numbers, depending on how you look at them, are 3, 7, 6, and 10. You got 1, and I got 1. So you get to keep that. Thank you so much.
Oh boy.
Remember for next time.
Don't lose him.
Now you're just telling me that you quite enjoy our new reporters, especially. Well, Adrienne Hill's been there for a while, but we have our new reporter, Kat McLeod.
Kate Nally, yep.
Kate Nally.
Yep. New highlight of the show.
Thank you very much. I'll pass that message along to them.
No worries.